Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to another edition of Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and even though you guys have been hearing episodes released the last few weeks, we record in batches, and so it's been a while since we've been in the studio to record, and so it's good to be back. This COVID-19 thing kind of threw us a little off of our schedule, and so like everybody else, we took some time to quarantine and social distance and try to help flatten the curve of the COVID-19 virus, but we're back in the saddle, so we're excited to be here. My guest today is Stacy Wellborn. Stacy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
When this episode airs, it will be episode probably 80-something. We've been trying for 80-something episodes to have you as a guest, and you stay very busy, and so our schedules never really worked out, but we finally got you in the studio, so we're happy to have you.
I really appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate that you continue to ask, and I wasn't able to be here, so it's summertime, and things have slowed down a little bit, very glad to be here with you.
We're excited. Just start, I know you do a lot. I think when you look up the definition of entrepreneur, your picture's probably right there beside the definition in the dictionary. So just tell me a little bit about what you do now, and we'll go from there.
Well, that's quite a compliment for you to say, of course. And I do wear many hats. My primary hat that I wear is as the owner of Wellborn Strategies, which is a marketing and PR firm. And I've essentially been doing marketing, PR, communications for close to 20 years. So that's my biggest hat. That has led me down a very interesting path where I have been able to own several other businesses as a result. And now we're sitting here in Container Yard, which is a co-working space. We've been open almost 4 years, now in our second location. And this has been an adventure with 3 other partners. And we really love it. It's a great space. We have met so many wonderful people, you guys included. And really, I'm looking to do some expansion in the next 6 to 12 months. Okay. I also do teach at Spring Hill College, teach marketing communications there. And I run a little event called Fizzy Fest, which is just for fun and an opportunity to throw a party celebrating champagne and benefiting a local nonprofit.
Very good. Yeah, we talked about, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but you mentioned off air, I guess, you love to celebrate the small victories, small milestones and that kind of thing. And I asked if there was champagne involved, and you said most definitely there usually is, which is I can appreciate that. So that's good. And Fizzy Fest is kind of right up that alley, right?
Yeah, exactly. I actually, I'm also in school. I'm getting a PhD in marketing right now, and I just finished my comprehensive exams. So there has been a number of bottles of champagne consumed over the last couple of weeks in celebration of that 2-year journey.
Wow, no doubt. Well, congratulations on
Thank
that.
You.
So let's jump in. I mean, the theme of the podcast is leadership and entrepreneurship. You have some great thoughts on leadership, and we have a little primer that we send guests before the shows, and based on what you filled out, start by giving me your definition of what a leader is, and then if you want to give me 2 or 3 key qualities that you think a good leader embodies, what would those be?
Wow. How to define leadership. To me, leadership is so much more than being a director or being a manager. Being a leader is somebody who has vision, who can communicate that vision, who sees the big picture, who can encourage others to get behind an idea and move it forward. Right. You know, I think leaders can be very charismatic, but they don't have to be. Right. Leaders just need to, I think, appreciate others and look for the good in others. One
of the things that you mentioned, qualities that you think someone needs to be a good leader, is compassion. That's one that really maybe hasn't come up quite as often as some others that you would think would come up when we talk about leaders. So what about compassion do you think is important? I mean, why does a leader need to be compassionate?
I guess because the way I define leadership is it's caring for others, and it comes from that background of servant leadership. And so to me, a good leader is somebody who has compassion, who considers the needs of others, who looks at the world in a way that says, how can I help? And that's just a different way of looking at it. And, you know, it's not to me, a leader in name could be a dictator. But that's not a leader in spirit, right? So to me, a leader in spirit is somebody who really considers the others first, and really looks at leadership from that servant leadership perspective. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that you said. We had some little check boxes. You know, what do you want to talk about? So servant leadership is something that you wanted to focus on. Do you consider that your leadership maybe style?
I would say so. I believe the gentleman that sort of coined the term servant leadership is Greenberg. I can't remember exactly, but I was introduced to that probably 20 years ago, and it just resonated with me. And I was fortunate in college to have some leadership experiences, some leadership training through some organizations that I did. And really, that's where that selflessness came from, and that leaders are servants. And if you are given that ability to lead, if a group selects you to be the leader, then it's your duty to serve the group.
Right. You know, something you just said kind of resonated with me. A leader, really, you can't be a self-appointed leader, right? Unless you have other people willing to fall in behind you, you're really not much of a leader. And so leadership is a two-way street, really. And I never really thought about it until you said that. But, you know, I can't just decide I'm going to be a leader if nobody is willing to follow, right?
Right. Now, certainly in the work environment, and there are certainly some examples in politics where that happens, people are given positions, whether you're the boss or you're an elected leader. That doesn't, to me, mean that you have the heart of a leader. Yeah. You know, and right, you have to have followers in order to be a leader. So if I'm a leader and nobody's following me, well, then I'm just a solo act. Right. Kind of doing my thing. So to me, you have to, the followers are what makes leaders successful.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you don't worry about your followers, you're out there by yourself.
Yeah, agree. And one of the things that you put on your list of qualities of a good leader that I thought was interesting is a habit of self-reflection. And we haven't really had anyone to key on that particular quality. So expand a little bit on that and tell us what you're thinking there.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on this topic. And I thought maybe that might be a unique perspective, and I wanted to share. And again, it's been something I was introduced to close to 20 years ago. There's a book called The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, and I went to a workshop with her. It was actually after a failed entrepreneurial experience. I had a restaurant in downtown Austin, Texas, and it was this massive adventure. We raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Big. Yeah. It was too much. And we closed it ultimately. It was open about 2 years, but lost a lot of people a lot of money, including myself. And it was really hard. So this woman happened to be in Austin, and I went to this 3-day workshop with her based on the recommendation of another friend. And through that process, she recommends a lot of self-reflection. Of course, I was at a period where I needed to do a lot of self-reflection. It was amazing. And one of her tools that she recommends is morning pages. Every morning, get up and write stream of consciousness, 3 pages. And ultimately just get the mess out of your head. You know that. I'm sure with all that you have going on in your world, you've got a lot in your brain. And so her thing is just take 15 minutes every morning and get the mess out of your brain and put it on paper. And you just write, and it's half the time it's junk about the weather and where my dog is sitting and how my coffee tastes. But every now and then I'll get these little ahas, and I think, oh, wow, okay. So that's that process of self-reflection, which is interesting now that I work at Spring Hill College. The Jesuit way is very much about self-reflection, and how do we, in everything we do, reflect on that experience and grow from it. So I still, to this day, 20 years later, this morning, I only wrote 1 page because honestly my pen ran out.
Technical difficulties, but you know.
But I notice if I don't take that time every morning to reflect kind of where I am in the world, my days are much more chaotic. So if I do it, and even in my chaotic world, wearing the multiple hats I do, if I spend that time in the morning reflecting, my days are so much smoother. Morning pages,
I love that. I love that. I've never really heard that term or that, you know, I've heard about journaling and that kind of thing, but I love the fact that it's in the morning, it's first thing, and I love the term.
It's just a data dump, right? It's just dump the mess out of your brain and get that out. And it's really, and so I can't tell you how many people I've recommended that book to. We've had small groups here about the book club, so I would recommend y'all. As you see, I like to read. I like to read a lot. And so that has been a book that really changed my life.
All right, and give the name one more time, an author.
It's Julia Cameron, and it's The Artist Way.
Okay, perfect.
It's about creativity and leadership, and it's got a little bit of spirituality in it, but it's neutral.
Great. Excellent. I want to go back to something that you mentioned in that story about your Austin, Texas restaurant venture. Talk about failure, because I mean, I've got to think that every true entrepreneur has had their share of failure. And I subscribe to the theory that if you're not failing, you're really not trying, you know, ultimately.
Amen.
So talk about failure and some of the lessons that you can learn through that.
The best lessons are learned through failure. Yeah. And I try and teach that with my students, with my clients, with everybody that I meet, because until you've had a failure, you don't understand your limitations. And part of understanding your limitations is also understanding that you can expand your limitations. So while I may think, I can't do that, well, go and try it. And maybe you can't, but maybe you can. Yeah. I always wanted to be in the restaurant business. In fact, my undergrad degree is in hospitality management. Okay. My family's in the restaurant business. third generation. So you may have heard of Cock of the Walk.
Absolutely.
Restaurants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My great aunt and uncle started Cock of the Walk.
Okay.
My uncle has had several restaurants, and there's one in Tuscaloosa called Cypress Inn. Okay. My uncle started that and ran it for 30 years. When I decided to open a restaurant in Austin, my great aunt said, don't do it. My uncle said, don't do it. And you know what I did? I went and did it.
Sure.
I don't listen very well. And I did it way too big. I mean, had we done a small cafe, we probably would have been okay. But we went into a 10,000 square foot space with 200 seats and massive menu. It was too much. Yeah. And so ultimately, I believe truly we were a little bit ahead of our time. It was before Austin downtown was really, there was no residential, just a lot of stuff. So again, I can look back at that. Hindsight's 2020, right? There's a reason why we say that all the time. It's true. Even today, when we look at doing something, I'm considering some things here for Container Yard, and I think, okay, well, should we do that? Should we not do that? I reflect back on that experience and think, what did I learn from that experience almost 20 years ago now that I can use today to make a better decision? Had I not made that mistake 20 years ago, and I don't really consider it a mistake, there were mistakes along the way, but ultimately I'm grateful for that experience because it makes me a better leader, better entrepreneur today.
Well, the only tragedy in a failure, in my opinion, is a lesson that's not learned, right? So, great point. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about Brene Brown. You mentioned her earlier when we were talking before the show started. What about her resonates with you? She's an author, right? What about Miss Brown sticks out to you?
She focuses on vulnerability, which I think goes back to compassion, servant leadership. Yeah. It sort of builds on all of that. Again, another book, and she's written several books. I couldn't tell you all of them right this moment, and I even forget who introduced me to her, but she is a researcher, also the University of Houston, I believe, and she studies shame and vulnerability. And her message is to not be afraid, and it kind of goes back to failure. Yeah. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to be ashamed. And I'll tell you the way I felt when that restaurant failed, I was ashamed. Yeah. And I wanted to crawl under a rock and leave. I was like, oh my gosh, I've just put myself out there. I'm a failure. I'm horrible. I'm worthless. Well, it took time to process all of that. And I wish I'd known Brene Brown's work, 20 years ago, because it took a long time to get there. But I think now that research she has shown, it really shows that we've got to embrace vulnerability and not be afraid and shame. And we also live in this weird world in social media where there's this blame game, shame game going on. And so a lot of times I think we're afraid to step out because we might get blamed or shamed. Yeah. And I think that's an unfortunate part of social media. Yeah. I hope that it doesn't keep people from doing good things. Yeah.
Well, and talk about shame and being ashamed. I can't remember how many episodes ago it was, but we had a guy on here who talked kind of about the same thing. He had a failed financial real estate venture. And one of the things that he talked about was basically self-forgiveness. I mean, it took him a while to forgive himself for not succeeding, right? And so that's a big part also of, I think, moving forward and kind of facing that shame and being ashamed is that, you can forgive yourself for trying and not succeeding, right?
Exactly.
As long as you learn those lessons.
Yeah. But, a lot of high achievers, I think, have a tendency to do that, right? They're overachievers. They're used to achieving. They're used to hitting their milestones. And then when they don't, particularly I see that with young people, with my students, they've been top of their class in high school, top of their class in college. Maybe they get out and then the first job doesn't go well. And they just don't know how to react to it. I had one student who went to graduate school after college and it didn't go well. It was a very negative experience and she came back sort of ashamed. And we had a couple of conversations about it. I said, deal with that, like live it and accept it. But at some point you're going to have to put your big girl pants on and move on.
Right. Yeah.
And she has. And she actually went back to grad school and got another degree and now has a great job. But gosh, it was probably a 9 or 12 month period for her to get over that. You've got to live it. You can't just get over it.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah.
All right, the leadership challenge. Talk about that because I know that's something that you're very passionate about, and we talked a little before, again off mic, what that has meant to you, and I know that you're a certified instructor in that. So talk a little bit about that and what that is.
So real early in my career, probably my freshman year in college, I was introduced to this book called The Leadership Challenge. Again, it's two leadership researchers who developed this 5 practices of exemplary leadership. They then also developed an inventory called the Leadership Practices Inventory, and it's an assessment tool for your leadership skills. And it gave me a framework at a young age to understand leadership. And it has really been the basis of everything I've done. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in a transition point and I had this opportunity to go do a training with them and become certified. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll start a business as a leadership coach. And so I went and did the training. So I became a certified coach and administrator of this inventory. And I kind of worked on that for a little bit. And ultimately, didn't work out to be my business. I kind of ended up doing back PR and doing Container Yard and other things. But I use those tools every single day. And I think when I'm leading the Fizzy Fest team, or I was really involved with Junior League and the Christmas Jubilee event, or whether it's teaching, those 5 practices of exemplary leadership are the foundation of what I do. So I recommend anybody, again, read the book, The Leadership Challenge. They've written several books as well. The LPI, Leadership Practice Inventory, is available. I'd be willing to help anybody with that if they were interested. Okay. There's a 360-degree evaluation you can do, so you can get bosses, cohorts, direct reports. It's really interesting. It's a simple test. It's because each of the 5 areas have 6 statements. And you basically just rate yourself on those 6 statements, the 30 total statements.
Gotcha. Okay. So, just quickly go over the 5 areas. I thought those were very, very good for people to kind of hear.
Yeah. So they're simple, which I also like about it. But it's the first is model the way, which is being a role model, right? So if do what you say, do what I say, not what I do. Is that the phrase? Be a good role model. Yeah. So that's basically model the way. Right. Inspire a shared vision. And I think that is really one of the key characteristics of leaders. You can have a vision, but if you can't communicate the vision, it's not worth anything, right? So how do you inspire a shared vision? We talked about earlier about followers and how important followers are. Well, in order to get followers on your team and on your path, you've got to inspire them. The third is challenge the process, which is great as an entrepreneur because you're constantly challenging processes. Right. So how do you do that? But how do you do that gently without disruption? And some disruption is good, right? But you don't always need to turn the apple cart upside down. Right. The third is enable others to act. How do you as a leader help others be successful? Servant leadership and those kinds of things. And then the last one, which probably is my favorite, is encourage the heart, which is celebrating. And they have a real belief in celebrating the small wins. And so, as we said, it's how do you enjoy the journey, not the destination? Yeah. And the journey, to me, I'm a journey person, not a destination person. I used to be, which is interesting. I was super type A as a young person. And so it was all about the destination. I got to get this degree. I've got to do this thing, accomplish. And what I have transitioned through all of my education and reading and self-reflection is it's really about the journey. And so let's celebrate the small wins along the journey so that when we get to the destination, or if we don't get to the destination, or if the destination changes or moves, that's okay too. You've accomplished, you've celebrated, you've reflected along the way. Yeah,
I love that. And I'm kind of with you. And I was not familiar with the Leadership Challenge, but that last one does resonate with me because sometimes the journey can be so long to get to the destination that if you don't enjoy the journey and celebrate those things as you go, then it's really kind of a miserable time, right? Because you're just kind of plodding and plowing and head down and, you're so focused on that destination, but that could be, depending on what you're doing, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. And so I definitely agree with you that the journey is very, very important. So that's great. Well, thanks for that. And of course, we'll link your social media and that kind of thing in the show notes. And if someone wants to get in contact with you about that, they can definitely do that. As we wrap up, I would be remiss because like I said, when we first started, we are kind of coming out of, hopefully, knock on wood, this COVID-19 thing. As one of the leaders of the Container Yard and kind of navigating what was an operation that kind of had to be shut down, right, for several weeks because of the nature of what you guys do with the public coming in. I mean, how did you kind of navigate those waters and, I don't know, just kind of keep the ship righted during that tough time? That had to be a difficult time.
It was certainly challenging. And we ultimately shut down completely for maybe 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. There were a couple of folks who still came in and worked. I mean, there were some that came every single day and worked. And we have that ability. But what we tried to do is focus on community and connections. So even though we couldn't be here together, we stayed engaged through our Facebook group, through email. I kind of checked up on people. We still have members who haven't been able to come back because, of childcare issues or other things. But we're very flexible. I mean, that's one of my life lessons is flexibility is the key to a happy life. Yeah. So be flexible. And that's Container Yard is built on flexibility and it's built also on community. So we've had a few folks who've had to back out for the summer, again, mostly because of childcare issues. they'll come back and we'll be here. And we've had some folks join us, and it's been okay. But it's something that we've had to really be intentional about, engaging our members to keep us all connected.
Yeah. I think that's important. I've talked to a lot of people during this time, and intentionality is a big one, because you get you get so out of the normal, right? I mean, what we've been through the last 2 or 3 months is not normal for anybody, and so intentionally, trying to keep those connections and that kind of thing is important. Technology has been a great thing. I think we have more Zoom experts now, probably 2 or 3 months after this thing has hit, than we've ever had before. So that's it's great that we're living, that we live in a time where that technology is available for us to kind of stay connected like that. But that's great insight. I appreciate that. Obviously, hospitality was your undergrad degree. You started a restaurant, and what's maybe the most memorable meal you've had, or maybe the most memorable restaurant that you've been to? I mean, what sticks out? I was reading something the other day, and it was actually a quote by Anthony Bourdain, and he always said that you can learn so much from sharing a meal with somebody. And I don't know what it is about sitting down around the table, but it's just very powerful. Right. Can you give me just one that maybe sticks out in your mind?
Yeah. And I read his book too. It's called Kitchen Confidential. So before we opened the restaurant, read that book, which also he said, don't do it. And I still did. But there are people today, I will tell you, that they will say something like, oh, I want to open a bar, I want to open a restaurant. I'm like, don't do it. Or if you do, just start small. And that actually probably, I should have said that earlier. That's one of the lessons that I think I took from that is whatever it is you do, start small. You don't have to go get a $500,000 loan or $100 million, whatever it is, to start a business. Just start a business with the $5 in your pocket. So that, to me, I think we have this perception that entrepreneurs are these fancy tech entrepreneurs who raise millions of dollars and they spend millions of dollars. But entrepreneurs are the kids selling lemonade on the side of the street.
Right.
So let's encourage more kids to have lemonade stands or come up with something that they can do. I mean, we've seen so much of that. That's something I've been interested in through this COVID stuff is, will we see more or less entrepreneurship? So are people going to move more towards independence and self-control, which that's how I see entrepreneurship, or are they going to move towards corporate safety nets, sort of that stability? And so I'm real curious to see how that plays out. But
that's an interesting point. I think that with as much remote work as we've had, and people have kind of gotten a taste of not being tied down to an 8-to-5 corporate job, I really think that people are going to be looking for more flexibility and maybe gig type things where they don't have to go to the same office every day from 8 to 5 and that kind of thing, and fight the traffic or whatever, the issues that folks have to deal with, commutes and that kind of thing. I don't know, I could be wrong, but that just that kind of has stuck out to me, that a lot of people I think are getting that taste, and I think they'll like it.
I agree with you, and I really do believe that that's the way it's going to go, and in the world that I live in with the co-working spaces, there's been some competing opinions about it. I think co-working is poised to grow, because I do think even the larger companies are saying, oh gosh, I don't need that big office space. I can have people work from home in some office. And co-working is that middle point. Yep. So all those people who've been sent home, who have gotten tired of being home, now have a co-working space they can come to. Yeah. But they don't have to necessarily come every day 8 to 5.
Right, yeah.
So again, back to flexibility. Yep. I think we're going to see an environment in a world that values flexibility.
Yeah, I agree with that. So back to my question, meal or restaurant that made an impact. There's
so many, but as soon as you said that, just this one triggered in my mind. I don't know why it did, but it was actually in Paris, France. This is probably, I've been here 14 years. So this is 15, 16 years ago. And it was a Michelin 3-star restaurant, one of those places that you just cannot get in. And I happened to get a reservation for lunch. So that's one of the things somebody had told me a long time ago. If you want to go to a really fancy, really expensive restaurant, go for lunch. Because it's easier to get in, it's less expensive, but you still get the experience. And so did that, had a wonderful lunch, a long lunch. But the thing that stood out to me was they had bubblegum ice cream. And I know that's random, but I will forever remember that bubblegum ice cream.
Well, I mean, things that make an impact, that's why they make an impact. And I would say that when you started with Paris, France, that was a pretty good indication that was going to be a good story.
Yeah, so. Paris is one of my favorite places in the world. I'm not going to lie. I'm dying to get back.
Very good, very good. Stacy, I could talk to you all day. It's been great. Thanks for coming. It was worth the wait. I mean, this has been very insightful, very enjoyable for me. I appreciate you taking the time. I'll just give one of the website is containeryardworks.com. We'll link your other social media, personal and business, in the show notes below. But you guys do a great job around here. We're fortunate to have met you guys and be a part of what you do at Big Fried Studios and Container Yard. So again, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. As always, a big thanks to producer Carrie Wolf and editor Johnny Gwynn. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.